F-A-T. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about emotions and where they fit into our lives and how, as Christians, we're supposed to deal with those. And of course, we're going to start with the example above all examples, Jesus. And so we'll get right to that conversation right after these messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast is brought to you by Faulkner University's Leaders Connect Retreat 2023 on campus in Montgomery, Alabama on June 12th through the 15th. This year's focus is on helping your congregation thrive in a post-pandemic world. Your elders, deacons, preachers, and their wives, future leaders, and Bible class teachers are invited to be encouraged and encourage those who will lead our congregations in the future. You can get more information and register at www.faulkner.edu/leaders-connect-2023 or click on the link in the description of this episode. That's www.faulkner.edu/leaders-connect-2023. I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes.
What's happening? Sitting out here in the sun, looking real nice, I guess, as the sun glares off of my forehead. But it is a good day, and we've been spending a little time over here at Thrive in Decatur, the Decatur Church of Christ. And so we're sitting outside to do a little recording.
Watching some people shoot basketball in the far distance and listen to the birds chirp and out in nature and getting some of that good old sunshine. And better get used to it because camps are coming up. We'll be outside in the heat and all that stuff. But this has been a great weekend so far. We've heard some great speakers, enjoyed it. But we have been presenting some of our Helping Healing Humor mental health workshops and the stuff we did in West Virginia last month. We're doing here in Decatur this weekend. And then next month, we go to the great northwest of Alaska at Anchorage Church of Christ. And we love doing this stuff. It's always good to see folks and meet folks and hear their stories. We've heard some ways in which God has showed up and showed out, as we like to talk about. And so we're going to share a little bit of that material with you. Maybe wet your whistle. Is that even anything anyone says anymore?
Not real sure.
Whet your appetite, whatever. We would love to come, and got a couple of dates out there where we are available, and we'd love to come present this material if you think it's something that would be beneficial to your congregation. And as I mentioned in the intro, talk a little bit about emotions. I think when I was growing up, I kind of pictured Jesus as this almost emotionless. As a kid, as a man, a lot of times we don't put a lot of stock in emotion, and we're supposed to keep those in check and never share them. I think obviously we should keep them in check, but the never sharing part is probably not beneficial to anyone's mental health.
No, it's really, we all have them. Everybody's got emotions. It's just, I think in generations past, we've been taught to bottle them up, not talk about them, not say anything. If you don't, and somebody even mentioned that yesterday, last night, as we were presenting some of that, it was, kind of like if you don't mention it, it doesn't exist. But the problem is, if you don't mention it and you don't deal with it, it comes back up later. There's a great book that I read to the kids at Mars Hill, and it's called Soda Pop Head. We don't talk about soda pop in the South, but it's this kid whose head kind of turns into a Coke bottle when he starts getting angry, and he blows his top, and it makes a mess, and it hits people, and all those different things. And the whole moral of the story is he shouldn't bottle it up. He's got to find ways to let that emotion out. And so usually if we don't do something with it as it comes along, we end up hurting the people around us. We end up saying the things that we shouldn't say. I've been guilty. I'm sure most of us have at some point of bottling up and then making a mess.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to start with the example of Jesus. Jesus faced disappointment. He had emotions. I don't think that if he was emotionless, I don't know how people would be. He would be such a magnet for people. People don't want us to be over emotional, but we also need a personality. And I think that was something that I grew up with, that almost was lacking, wasn't really spoke about very much. And so I pictured this idea of the perfect man as not having emotion somehow. And I'm not saying that's on people who taught me. I think it was just something that I had created in my mind that wasn't really true and didn't reveal what the gospel reveals.
He was tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin. So to have been tempted in all points, there had to have been some emotions that were faced. We know even in the Old Testament, it talks about God being angry. It talks about God being sad. It puts these emotions onto God. Well, he created us in his image. So that is not just a physical, it's not, I don't think it really is a physical thing. It's our character is like him. And so, that's the one thing is Jesus did struggle. And John 11:35 is the favorite verse of every child that's told they have to memorize a Bible verse, right? Jesus wept. And I grew up and even have been guilty at times of trying to figure out what was it that made Jesus weep. It was because people didn't understand his power, or it was because people didn't, and we try to figure out what is it that would have made the Son of God actually cry. Well, it could have been that the people around him were crying, and that the people around him were weeping, and the people around him were hurting, and he was weeping with those who weep and rejoicing with those who rejoice. The family he loved was crying. And even though for him, I mean, you've probably been there where it might not be a devastating loss to you personally, but you get around people who are hurting and you can't help but cry. You watch a movie, about some event that has nothing to do with your life, but you'll sit there and get emotional about it because emotions are just a part of life.
Those things that are common to man, that we all face and all deal with. And that's really what this podcast is about, things that are common to man. And hopefully we're helping healing and add a little humor to it. But humor is certainly one of those things that is an emotion. And so we see disappointment in Jesus' life. Mark chapter 4, do you not understand this parable? Talking about the parable of the sower. How then will you understand all the parables? I think it's okay to read into there. There's at least some disappointment, if not borderline frustration, with their lack of understanding. Once again, as a teacher, as for my own self, a lack of understanding. And I go back to the point, a lot of time spent on why did Jesus weep there? And really the point is Jesus wept.
Yeah.
He was touchable. He was approachable. He had emotions. He had feelings.
Well, you read that in Mark 4, and I think of John 14, where Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you, all that. And then they say, well, if you'll just show us the Father, it'll be enough for us. And he says, have I not been with you so long that you don't know that I'm the Father, that the Father's in me and I'm in the Father? And so, you can read into a lot of the statements Jesus made. You have little faith. Why do you doubt? And Jesus had to have struggled at times when people just didn't seem to get it. I mean, you're a teacher.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we did Spiritual Emphasis Day. Travis might have had a little frustration at times because some of them didn't get it. There were just some things about it. And so we get frustrated as teachers, as preachers, youth ministers, parents, when we're trying to teach a lesson and trying to do something to help the kids understand it, and they just don't seem to get it.
Well, the flip side of that, and speaking of discussions, teaching, the disciples, they had emotions, and Jesus may have rebuked them, but he did not take those emotions as an offense and to have nothing to do with them. At the end of chapter 4, they're fearful. Jesus speaks to the wind, peace be still, and their response is not, oh, Lord, Jesus, that's awesome, it's amazing. It's fear.
They're scared.
Like, who is this that we've gotten into? They're questioning their relationship to Jesus. Jesus is not questioning their relationship with him. And so even the disciples had fear. They had emotions. You get into being mocked, chapter 5 and verse 40. You see, and they laughed at him when he is about to raise this girl from the dead, or from sleep, as he says. They laughed at him. Once again, that doesn't defeat his ability to handle it. And in fact, in the face of mocking,
well, it won't be the last time they mock him.
No.
It won't be the last time they say things, hurtful to him in those ways. And so, yeah, absolutely. There's fear, and there's the mocking that he faced. And along with the mocking, I guess we kind of go along with it is the rejection.
Yes.
You know, he's not just mocked, but he's rejected. Have you ever felt rejected? Have you ever felt like people don't understand you? Well, God, God's been there through Jesus. I don't think Jesus had to come to earth to understand our emotions because he created us.
Mm.
I think Jesus, some of those things that Jesus did help us understand that he understands, helps us understand that he understands. It's not that he didn't before, but it helps us see, okay, here's a man who struggled with these different things while he was on this earth. I mean, God was feeling rejected even in the Old Testament. His people had rejected him
That's
on
one of
more
my
than one
favorite
occasion.
story is Samuel gets all upset because they're asking for a king to be like everybody else. I mean, what parent doesn't feel that one, right? I want to be like everybody. Oh, they got it. I want it. Well, if they jumped off a bridge, would you? The great question there. And God's response is, why are you mad?
Yeah.
They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. I think as a preacher, it's very tempting. Maybe you don't have the response or people aren't doing what you want them to do. That's not new to preachers, right? Jesus was rejected. We just covered that.
Yep.
But they're rejecting the truth, not me. I don't need to attach my self-worth and value to people's response to me. That doesn't mean we can't be emotional. Doesn't mean we can't be saddened by it. Doesn't mean we can't be disappointed by it. But our relationship with God is really not determined by our effectiveness. And man, the older I get and realize that I don't have a process for everything, the more that gives me really a lot of hope. And then, of course, we talked about the grief. You mentioned the story of Lazarus and the things that are going there. You think about when John the Baptist was beheaded, and there had to be some grief there.
Had there been difficulty
and
with
the rebukes that he did have to hand out to the disciples. And I don't view Jesus, when he even pronounces the woes on the Pharisees, as that something as enjoyable to him.
If anybody's ever done that, it's not deeply enjoyable. So, I kind of jump ahead a little bit too, because when we think about emotions, most of us think about worry and anxiety. And, you jump ahead in Jesus' life, even over into Mark, really all the Gospels sort of help us understand it. But even Jesus said, I am deeply grieved. I am struggling, with the fact that he's going to the cross, and he understands what's happening to him. He understands what he's about to have to deal with. And so while he's in Gethsemane and praying, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. He's struggling with this decision.
And I've never faced anything remotely like that. But knowing it's what has to be done is not always the salve that you're looking for. Like, hey, this has to be done. This is the medicine I have to take. These are the obstacles I have to do. None of them sound very fun, and that doesn't solve the problem. It's not that he doesn't know the things that he's facing. He knows full well, better than anybody that's ever faced anything.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still grieved to the point of death.
Yeah.
And so it's important to acknowledge that. I think you mentioned it, that here's the creator of the universe who knows the plan. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, suffered the cross. It does not take away the grief in the moment that, hey, I really am not looking forward to this. It is even able to admit it.
Mark, in his own words, says very distressed and troubled. Jesus says it, but Mark says he was very distressed and troubled. And so many times we think, I've heard people give people a hard time for being, worried or anxious, and that you're not, you're sinning when you do those things. Well, Jesus didn't sin, and yet he was distressed and troubled and sweating drops of blood while he was in the garden. So, he was in a distressed state, a worried state. He was not sinning. Sometimes there are just things that are difficult for us, and we're going to struggle with them. But what he did was entrusted himself to God, who judges righteously. And in those moments, that's what God wants us to do. And that's what David did in the Psalms. We talked about last night a little bit, how the Psalms are are pretty brutal at the beginning, questioning God, angry with God sometimes, but toward the end of the psalm, they sort of calm down and go, I know you're with me. And God wants us what does Israel mean?
Struggle with God.
Struggle with God, wrestling with God. He wants us to wrestle with him. He wants us to spend time, putting out there the struggles and the frustrations and the fears and the anxieties, and cast your care on him, for he cares for you. And so whatever it is that you're facing, Jesus understands it, and he cares enough to want to carry it with you, and help you with it.
All right, Ben. From time to time, we post out there. Give us some questions for the podcast. What would you like for us to discuss? And jokingly, I think one of my friends on Instagram responded with wolves. So here we are, because I'm a man of my word. When I say the word wolves to wrap up our show, what do you think about? I'll give you a second to think. I think about, I can't remember who used this as an illustration. It may have been you, Ben, where when the wolves get out of hand, I think it maybe even in Alaska where we're going, but up north where there's a lot of snow or whatever, they'll
know
put
the story you're going to.
They'll put blood on a knife and make sure I'm telling this right.
Yeah.
And they stick it in the ground, and so they freeze it. The
like
wolf
a popsicle
smells the blood or is attracted by the blood and starts to lick that knife. And to get rid of the wolf basically continues to lick the knife until he bleeds to death because his own tongue starts. So I won't get into too many more details because that's probably enough.
Yeah.
Ben, what you think about when we say wolves?
So I think about, the funny part I think about is she should have chose Jake and not Edward. But then I'm not gonna get too much into that. But anyway, the one that stands out to me, it starts with January's always bitter.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Lord, this one beats all. And the wind ain't quit for weeks now, and the drifts are 10 feet tall. It's a lyric to one of Garth Brooks' songs, and it's talking about help me from being the ones the wolves pulled down. And it'll get you in the fields.
Yeah.
And I read the story about it one time, and it was a young girl who some of the people she knew in Montana, I think, had lost their farm, and she sat down and she was writing some songs while she was working through college, and she was kind of struggling, and she wrote out the lyrics and thought, that's trash. She balled them up and threw them in the trash can. And her boyfriend at the time came over to the apartment or something and was digging through the trash and finds these lyrics. And he's like, I think you need to give this one another go. And so fast forward, I don't know how long, she's playing in a honky tonk or a bar or something in Nashville. And while she's playing this song, she says there's these guys throwing darts in the back of the room. And all of a sudden they stopped throwing darts and walked to the front, got backward ball cap on, shorts, t-shirt, and he just sits there mesmerized listening to it. And afterwards he walks up to her and he says, I'm Garth Brooks and I'd like to record that song. There you go. And so, it was one of those, she was struggling and she was feeling the words to that song. And then I think with the money she made off that song, she was able to buy a farm close to where her grandparents had lost theirs, restore a bunch of stuff for her family just with that song.
Wow.
So the song's awesome in and of itself, but the story was really cool too.
Leave it up to Ben Hayes to tie everything together, right? I mean, that's what the professionals, that's always the all-pro counselor, tying it all back into emotions. Country music, there may not be a genre that plays off emotions. Anytime I hear about country music and I think of emotions, I think of probably the greatest country music song ever is He Stopped Loving Her Today.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So,
one.
that one's about halfway through and you're like, wait a minute.
So,
but we hope you have a great week, and we'll talk at you again sometime soon.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.